Hi friends, I'm Jake.
And I'm Miss.
And we're Board Down Under. Today you're watching us review Ankh, the Gods of Egypt, and we'll also touch on the Tomb of Wonders Kickstarter expansion as well. Let's see why I love this game.
And why I like it a little less. Ankh is a competitive 2 to 5 player area control game, designed by Eric Lang and published by Cool Mini or Not. It is the third instalment in Eric Lang's Myth Collection series. As with all CMON games, there's an abundance of miniatures here. The quality is superb, and as you would hope, CMON just get better and better in this aspect. An amazing addition here is the introduction of hard plastics for some of the weapons, which historically have been prone to bending, like Neo from The Matrix.
Oh, my back.
The base game ships with cardboard tokens, which are sturdy and look just fine, and the action track standees actually look pretty nice. For those wondering if you should drop fat stacks to get the Kickstarter edition, the plastic monuments and components are incredible. They really make the game pop and they look stunning. However, there are a couple of small niggles that we have with the components. The first is that the 3D obelisks in particular can get in the way of seeing who controls what. And the second is the 3 game boards were just a bit fiddly. Having the Devotion, Action Track and the base board all separate is frankly a bit naff. This is less of an issue if you purchase the neoprene mat, but $50 just to consolidate some cardboard?
As for the theme of Ankh, while both Miss and I really liked the Egyptian setting, we found the overall theme of the game to be just a little bit ho-hum. So thematically, you're a god, and you're trying to gain devotion, and you do this by controlling monuments and areas of the map. But at no point did I actually feel like it was devotion that I was gaining on the devotion track, and not just victory points. Furthermore, you do get these rather imposing huge god figures, which is awesome, and admittedly, they never die during combat, but other than that, most of the time, they're just as strong as your wee warriors, which is pretty thematically underwhelming. The last point here is, over the course of the game, you're going to gain these follower tokens, and then you're going to put them to the knife to do things like gain monuments,
and power, which is pretty bloody grim if you think about it.
But again, I could easily replace the word follower with gold and have a similar feeling. Perhaps if followers were tied to the amount of devotion that you gained, since they are the ones actually worshipping you, maybe that would have tied the theme up a little more for me.
Your setup and teardown time is going to take about 30 minutes. Depending on your expansions, there's going to be a few different boxes you need to sift through to find components, as well as different board layouts to set up for your game. To learn the game takes about 20 minutes, and to teach the game is obviously less because you don't have to explain the setup rules, so that's a big plus for this one. When setting up, players are going to have to make some interesting choices. This will influence your strategy.
Arguably the most important decision that you'll make is picking which god to play. And that's because each god comes with its own unique power, and each power is, well, very powerful. Now, unfortunately, the gods themselves aren't necessarily balanced, and that's especially true across different player counts. Personally, we haven't found this to be particularly bothersome, and that's because each god still feels like it brings something unique and powerful to the table. Just because one boasts a high combat power in a particular region, another might be better at spreading across all regions and controlling the whole map.
So you've settled into your new role as a god, and you're ready to play with the lives of mere mortals. But first you'll need to pick a scenario. The base game comes with a scenario booklet, and this offers some variety for different player counts. Ankh scenarios alter the board state from the beginning, and many add additional rules to the game. Some may be slight deviations, but others, such as the People's Revolt, found on CMON's website, drastically change the game. Here, some of the fundamental rules of the game are flipped on their head. and winning battles can have consequences. Now historically, CMON have released additional scenarios for their other games, and we can only hope that Ankh will receive the same love, and in the future, maybe there'll be some new and exciting ways to play this game.
Next, you're going to select out some of the local residents of Egypt. We really like this setup mechanism because you're going to fetch out one of each level guardian at the start of the game, and that means you don't have to play hide and go seek with miniatures during your game. Similar to gods, each guardian has a unique ability displayed on its card. For gameplay purposes, this ability and the awesome looking miniatures are the only thing that separates these fearsome creatures from your standard units. Unless stated, they have the same movement and power as a regular warrior. This often slight variation from regular units puts these guardians in an interesting space, where some of them might synergize with your game plan, or just feel powerful, but you don't necessarily need to acquire these to have a successful strategy.
The final setup decision that you'll need to make is deciding on who's going to be the first player. Now this might not seem like it's worth mentioning, but it actually has a surprisingly big impact. We'll discuss these reasons as they come up.
Now with all that set in sandstone, it's time to embark on a strategic and tactical journey to become the one true god of Egypt. Now I say strategic and tactical because this game has that in spades. On the surface, it's very straightforward, but as you dig deeper, you'll realise that below is an incredibly thought-provoking game, where quite literally everything you do should be weighed up against other available options. It's also an incredibly strategic game because there's no luck or randomness here. After this setup point, there's no dice, there's no drawing of cards, there's no card drafting. All the information's available to you. It's entirely possible for players to play an identical game, just like chess, if they each take the exact same action in sequence.
There is a bit of a problem here though, and it's not a new problem for strategy games, but it's worth mentioning. The game can be really unforgiving for new players, so if you've played this game a couple of times already and you're wanting to introduce it to a new friend, well, you're either going to have a total blowout with your scores, or you're going to have to play suboptimally to prevent that. The game plays out in turn order, with players taking turns to perform up to 2 actions. These can either be moving their units, summoning their units, gaining followers, or unlocking an Ankh power on the tech tree. Now when a player takes their second action, that must always be below the first on the track, and if either of their actions cause one of the markers to reach the end of the track, an event will trigger. When an event's triggered, the triggering player is either going to get to take control of a monument, start conflict in all regions of the board, or cause a great divide among a region with an impenetrable wall of camels. This core engine is so streamlined, yet the level of tactical play that it provides is deceptive. Sometimes the decisions that you want to make aren't going to be the best for you in the long run, so you'll need to adapt your strategy as you're playing. Also, it's really beneficial to be triggering an event on your turn, and as such, a real kicker if you set your opponent up to do so. For example, each monument gained from the first 3 control monument events is likely to provide 3 to 4 devotion over the course of the game, as well as the potential attunement benefits.
Yeah, so it's important not to give these up willy-nilly. When you're taking your actions, make sure you weigh up whether or not you've got the opportunity to trigger an event, and what state you're going to leave that action track in for your opponents. Despite them all being impactful, arguably the most valuable action on the track is the gain Ankh power action. By throwing away the lives of some followers, you're going to gain yourself a permanent Ankh power which will help you throughout the entire game. Additionally, each time a player reveals the scarab symbol, they may retrieve a guardian from the pool. But only if there's a guardian remaining of that level in the pool. The early god gets the giant monument-eating scorpion, so to speak. And that brings us to the first of the problems that Miss mentioned earlier. The guardian pool always starts as less than the number of players in the game. So If players earlier in the turn order prioritise gaining Ankh powers each turn, there's literally nothing that the later players can do to stop them from gaining the Guardians. There's a fair dinkum chance, as one of the later players, you'll be left stranded watching the Guardian Oasis dry up on the horizon.
Yeah, but the yin to this yang is that for that first player to be focusing on gaining Ankh powers, they may not be playing the game optimally. They may have to gain followers inefficiently so that they have the power, or they may be giving up triggering an event, or even more importantly, they may be setting up the gain Ankh power track to the prime position for an opponent to double dip actions and trigger an event. So there's always going to be these potential trade-offs, and it's a very real possibility, so it's definitely something to be aware of. Depending on player order, you might want to think about this and factor it into your strategy. This becomes especially important in a two-player game.
Now, earlier in the review, I said you didn't need to obtain Guardians to have a successful strategy, but there is something that I want to point out. Each god only has 6 warrior figures in their pool, and when playing some gods or using Pyramid Attunement, you will run out of units to summon. When playing these strategies, gaining Guardians becomes even more important, because these Guardians are added to your pool, which means not only do you get the unit's special ability, but you also increase your maximum unit cap. This, coupled with the points that we were discussing previously, means that if you're the last player and you want to summon a lot of units, you might end up getting frustrated. Now, honestly, I don't know how balanced this is, but it does add weight to both gaining and denying these Guardians.
Now, the Ankh powers themselves, these are going to provide both strategic and tactical options for you to assess throughout the course of the game. The first column focuses on gaining followers and is fairly straightforward. The middle column, and in my opinion the most fun, lets you drastically improve your gameplay in a few different ways. Here, you're going to choose which types of monuments your god fancies and attune to them. Or, if your god hates variety, they might attune to a single type and get stronger by controlling 3 or more of that type. It's beneficial to note what other players are focusing on when you're choosing these, because having a more diverse set of monuments may actually win you more devotion from monument majorities in the long run. Finally, the third column allows you to cash in on your overall strategy by gaining devotion from a number of different ways, and this really helps on that final climb. Now, after our first couple of games, I was a little worried that the Ankh powers, there just wasn't enough variety in them and they would start to feel stale. But as we've played, I just keep finding myself thinking of more and more things I want to try. So while there isn't a lot of variety in these 12 powers, they do feel balanced, they allow you to try a bunch of different strategies, and more importantly, they allow you to change your game plan as the game develops.
Yeah, I agree. So when I first started playing, I really got the impression that this was a way to build my god. I was going to pick these powers that synergize with one another and, create this awesome end game. But as I've played more, I've realized that these powers don't necessarily synergize with one another. Instead, each one is powerful in its own right, and the ones that I end up choosing are based on either my god power or the current state of the game. That's enough about trees full of tech. Since Ankh's a delicious desert, everything we've spoken about up until now is the gooey cake, and the conflict is the delicious cream, which is easily 50% of the importance.
When a player triggers the conflict event, an epic war is going to break out across the board, and the triggering player is going to get this tiebreaker token. That'll give them a little bit of a boost in the battle without feeling too unbalanced. Each region containing only one player will have that player banking some easy devotion, whereas each region containing 2 or more players triggers a battle. And here's where we come to our favourite aspect of this game. Each player has the same set of 7 cards, and each card has its own unique ability. Each player will play 1 card face down before they are revealed and resolved, with the end result being the winner of that battle region.
played cards remain face up on the table, revealed for everyone to see, until you play the Cycle of Mark card, at which point they're all returned to your hand and you've got full options again. This incredibly simple, streamlined engine of just a few cards hits you in the brain with the consideration train. What cards do my opponents have access to? What cards do I have access to, and which do I need for the following regions I'm battling for? How many followers do my opponents have in case a Plague of Locusts gets played? Where and when, what monument should I build, given the devotion I could gain, or the attunement benefits it could enable, or just the region controller might help with by preventing my opponents from standing in that space? How much devotion could I gain by losing with a miracle? And what does my opponent think I'm going to play? Because I could just push my luck by playing something that assumes my opponent will be forfeiting the battle. There's a boggling amount of stuff to think about here. And admittedly, it all gets a little simpler as you run your way through the combat cards. But as soon as you play that cycle card again, you're back up to peak consideration and you want to contend for every single region on the board.
Yeah, we really love this system. All the information is laid out for you, and it's up to you to decide how you're going to proceed with that. The mind games that this creates as you try to outmaneuver your opponents, and there's always the ever-present possibility of a plague being played, which looms like a dark cloud threatening to wipe out your followers, or your units, or maybe even both. The tension and opportunities that this system provides, well, it's nothing short of incredible, really.
Yeah, I completely agree. Love this system. Now, over the course of the conflict, players are going to gain devotion up on the devotion track. And the first player to reach the end is going to win. The game's going to end at that point. This will generally happen at the fourth conflict. But the game stops here, and this sudden stop is a bit of an issue because it means that players going later in turn order potentially haven't had the same number of actions as the players that went earlier. So that's another advantage that the first player gets in the game.
Any players who are remaining in the red area of the devotion track when the fourth conflict ends are going to be eliminated from the game. This may bring up PTSD for anyone who's played a Battle Royale game recently. So there is some player elimination, but it's really not a big deal. More often than not, the game finishes during that fourth conflict anyway, and if it doesn't, it's going to wrap up soon after. That's the general game overview and some of the opinions that we have on it. Now we're going to talk about the God merging aspect at the end of this video because it's quite contentious and it'll probably take us some time. So first, I guess we'll just touch on some of the overall thoughts on the game and a rating for it.
Yeah, so let's start with the replayability, which I think we both agree is really high here. I have yet to find a God that I don't want to play more and more. I have done a ranking video, which you can check out in the description below, but that ranking, I think, is going to shift as I uncover more and more of these gods and delve deeper into them, which is saying something. Now, some gods do feel like they dictate a strategy, but generally speaking, there's enough god, scenario, guardian, Ankh power, and player count variance that hopefully you'll feel like you have quite a few options for a while. And I genuinely think that even if you're playing the same god with the same Ankh powers, there's enough going on in the game to adapt to that you're genuinely going to have fun and feel engaged most of the time.
If you're just thinking of getting the base box, we do think that this significantly reduces the replayability, as you won't have the same variety of gods and guardians. That said, there's still enough in the box for you to enjoy many playthroughs. Now, do you think Ankh overstays its welcome?
Hopefully less than this review.
The game can take a few hours at higher player counts, and as with all strategy games, you can get stuck in a state of analysis paralysis. But there's literally 4 actions for you to choose from, so it's really not that bad here. I guess some people are just more prone to it. Generally speaking though, throughout our games we've been engaged, and even in the longer games we've been invested from the start to the end. I guess the last thing we might want to talk about is the player counts.
Yeah, so look, I like this at pretty much every player count. I think it shines at 2 and 4. I think at 5 the board clutters up just that little bit too much and gets too chaotic. I think the game length spans out just a little bit longer than I'd really like it to. At 3, if you're going to skip the merge mechanism, I think at 3 it plays out pretty bloody good as well. But the game absolutely shines at 2. So it's awesomely strategic, it's quite snappy, it's absolutely amazing. My biggest concern at 2 is the god imbalance, but man, I would have to play a lot more to know if that's actually a concern. And if you've got a bigger group, I think 4 is great as well. The board's spacious enough to feel like there's plenty of things to do, and I think the god powers feel, fairly balanced at that point as well. And the game doesn't actually stretch on too long at 4. And that brings us to our rating and recommendation section. So for me, I'm rating Ankh a 9. There's a few meaningful issues which we've touched on, and thematically it doesn't really do it for me. So I can't quite justify giving it a 10, but boy oh boy do I want to stress how much I really, really like this game.
Yeah, I mean, I have really enjoyed playing this game. I'm left wanting to play more and try different strategies, so I'm going to give it an 8. It just doesn't quite get there for me because the play style in this, where you need to be thinking so much ahead into what you're going to do in those later turns and all the forethought that's required, just doesn't really fit with my happy-go-lucky style. And moving on, the dollars and cents recommendation. Does it make sense for you guys to drop $210 to get this game?
Yeah, look, as much as I really like this game, I don't think I can recommend it at that kind of retail price. I think if you look in comparison, you can pick up Blood Rage for about 130, and that has loose similarities to this. It's a fantastic game as well, and I mean, it's not half the price, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, and I think furthermore, if you are going to get Ankh, you really want to be spending that bit extra to get the expansions, the exclusive Tomb of Wonders and the Pantheon expansion, just so you can increase your god variety, and that'll obviously just drive the price up even more.
Very quickly, for a comparison between the previous Myth games, Blood Rage is an area control game that puts heavy emphasis on combat, whereas Rising Sun kind of puts the emphasis on diplomacy and negotiation. Now, I feel like Ankh splits the difference. It has combat that really does feel like combat, but it also ties in player intrigue and bluffing with its card play. For me, I think I probably put Ankh above the other two.
Yeah, I think for me, Ankh probably comes in second with Blood Rage on top of it, but as we play this more, that may change in the future. Now, for what you've all been waiting for, the Merged God section of this review. And probably the only thing that we actually disagree on in this game, because I'm not really a fan.
And I think you're wrong, because I don't think it's that bad. For anyone that might not know, at the end of the third conflict, the two bottom players merge together. From then, they get one action each, and they both use the second last player's figures and Ankh powers, but they drop to the last player's position on the devotion track. This merged god now has both the involved god's powers, which is pretty cool stuff.
When we read the rules, I really loved this idea of the Merged God mechanic, giving a boost to players who aren't doing so well to create more fun for them, as well as more fun for everybody else with a tighter and more competitive game. It sounds awesome, and yet when we've actually had it play out in our games, I just haven't enjoyed it. In a 3-player game, it's felt way too powerful. The Merged Gods have been able to take control of the action track and just really take advantage of the power there. And in a 5-player game, or those higher player counts, it hasn't felt meaningful. The Merged Gods have ended up so far behind on the devotion track that they have no chance of winning. And so they're just kind of filling in time and creating havoc on the board, but that havoc really messes a lot more with whoever's turn follows theirs. And it just didn't really feel all that fair.
Yeah, I really don't mind this mechanism, and for a number of reasons. The first being double god powers. There are some pretty cool combinations here that can make for some pretty powerful feeling turns towards the end of the game. And that when a moment ago you were last on the devotion track with nowhere really to go, it can feel pretty powerful. Secondly, I like that it adds more strategy to the game. There's another layer here, there's another reason to be tactful and to adapt. I like that. It's not some random event that gets pulled out of an event deck and you can't really predict it. You know that it's coming. Every third conflict, it's there. And so you can prepare for it. If you think that you might be the higher god, you should spend that third conflict preparing yourself, gain followers, try and protect your units so that you can go into that fourth combat as strong as possible, and do whatever you can to help the last player gain more devotion. And as the last player, you should really be trying to gain as much devotion as you can. You don't need to worry about preserving units or anything like that. In a much tighter game on the devotion track, this can be less black and white, but for the most part, I think it's just another thing to think about, another thing to add to your game plan, and I really like that. You can think about picking up the Bountiful Ankh power, and along with the Bountiful Ankh power, you could pick up another of those third level powers to really skyrocket you through the red track. I've seen some really, really cool turns in that fourth conflict where the merged god has gone from halfway through the track to nearly being at the top. And that brings me to another thing that I like about this mechanism. It doesn't mean that you're going to win, but it also doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to lose. It just feels like it builds excitement, and I really, really like that. But this rule, man, it's half-baked. There's no two ways about it. I really like it, and I want it in my games, but man, does it have some flaws. The first major offender here is seating location. So the power level of this mechanism changes so much based on where the two merged players are seated. If the two merged players are seated adjacent, it's so much more powerful, and the reason for that is this. The first player can take an action from here to here, and the second player can take the same action, triggering an event with it. That, at this point in the game, is really powerful, because the two merged players will either split a region in their benefit, or get to steal control of one of two monuments from other players on the board. And that can really mess with those players' resplendent Ankh power buffs, or their attunement strategies. This is even more serious in a 3-player game, where not only are you always adjacent to your ally, but you've only got one person to steal monuments off, which is why this kind of feels broken in a 3-player game. Now in 4 and 5-player games, the flip side is if you're not sitting adjacent, you only have the one action, and the only time you might get to trigger an event is if an opponent sets you up to do so. And while that might happen, it's significantly lower chance of happening. And so it feels really, really bad having such a power shift based on just where players might be seated. I kind of wish there was a rule here that made the two merged gods always end up together, so that at least there's some consistency in the power level of this mechanism. So the next issue that I've got is around communication, and again, it's exaggerated based on seating location. You need to communicate with your ally here when you're merged. You want to have some sort of aligned strategy. And in a conflict type of game, a competitive game like this, that's always difficult. But when you've got to do it across the table, it's even worse. Especially in conflict, because you only get one set of cards to play with, and you need to determine which card is going to get played for any particular region. So yeah, the communication here is another downside. I'm not sure how this gets fixed, but it is a problem with this merge mechanism that you should be aware of. The two much smaller issues that I've got, the first is around new players. So a new player to this game is already going to struggle because of how strategic it is and how much they have to learn. But then towards the end of the game, the chances are they're going to be part of the merge, and that forces them into having to learn a whole new set of rules. They only get one action. They've got 2 god powers. While this can feel strong and awesome, it can also just be a little overwhelming for someone that's still coming to grips with how the game plays out and the game arc. So my recommendation here is either make sure that the new player you're playing with is comfortable with this, or just omit the rule for that game. Lastly is downtime. Now, it's not a major issue, but this game is fairly snappy. And when you go through this merge mechanism, there is a bit of downtime here where you're cleaning up one player's tokens, you're aligning some things, you're merging the gods together. And it's just enough to kind of break the flow, which isn't ideal, but again, it's one of those it's worse with less experienced players. Once you are playing with people that know how it works, it's going to move along a lot quicker. At the end of the day, we're all on the same playing field. Anyone going into a game of Ankh should know the rules and have the same set of considerations. It's a bit like a game of footy, where 2 teams are going to step onto the oval and they need to factor in the day's conditions to their tactics. Ankh really is no different. Some scenarios require you to consider the merge mechanism, and others won't. Even in a 3-player game where the merge is arguably the most impactful, it creates an interesting dynamic where you don't necessarily want to be winning at the end of that 3rd conflict, because being there might lose you the game. That being said, we have played a 3-player game in which one player popped off so hard that the 3rd conflict was the last, because they won. But with all that said, we play games to have fun, and some people aren't going to enjoy this mechanism. So if you and your game group might fall into that category, my recommendation is just don't play with it, because the game really doesn't break without it. We'll wholly merge a review-a-thon. Thank you so much for watching, friends. We hope that you've enjoyed this video. We hope that you've enjoyed the format. Hopefully it wasn't too long, but please let us know if you've got any feedback in the comments.
Yeah, whether it's game related, format related, time related, or even spotted feline related. We love the back and forth, and we're always looking to learn and improve, so let us know any feedback you have. Thanks for watching. I'm Miss.
And I'm a cheater.
Bye.
Bye.